I'll cover the talk by an overview of inflammatory bowel disease, the current treatment options and limitations, and what are the emerging options available. As far as actually inflammatory bowel disease is concerned, it is a chronic inflammation of gastrointestinal tract. Basically, it is a dysregulation of the human immune responses leading to a chronic intestinal inflammation in a genetically susceptible population. 90% of the time it is ulcerative colitis, and less commonly seen is Crohn's disease. And the difference between the two is that ulcerative colitis is basically a mucosal disease, and Crohn's disease is a transmural disease. Ulcerative colitis actually involves only colon, and Crohn's disease is seen not only in colon but also in small intestine and ileocecal area. But both the conditions, they differ in their genetic predisposition, their risk factors, their clinical, endoscopic and histological features. As far as ulcerative colitis is concerned, these are the patients who actually present with diarrhea, rectal bleeding and passage of mucus. That is the commonest presentation these patients have. Some of the patients get spasmodic pain, and if the disease process is active, these patients are anorectic, they have weight loss. Few of the patients get dyspeptic symptoms, and fever is also one of the manifestations of an active disease. As far as extraintestinal manifestations of ulcerative colitis are concerned, there may be involvement of joints in the form of peripheral arthritis, ankylosing spondylitis and sacroiliitis. And if you treat actually ulcerative colitis, this joint involvement also gets better. As far as ocular lesions are concerned, these patients, they present with episcleritis, keratitis and iritis. And then the skin involvement is also there. These patients have aphthous stomatitis, they get erythema nodosum, pyoderma gangrenosum, and in fact, one of the actually entity coined as metastatic celiac Crohn's disease is that patient will present with non-healing ulcers of the skin, and if you investigate them, you find granulomas there, and there may be associated involvement of the GI tract, and you treat the Crohn's disease of the GI tract, and these skin lesions also get better. As far as the risk for malignancy is concerned, it is to the tune of 18% by the end of 30 years in the colon in patients of ulcerative colitis. How you diagnose ulcerative colitis? That is by taking a clinical history, in which actually these patients, they have a clinical history of a long duration. That means more than 4 to 6 weeks of passage of blood, which is mixed with mucus associated with urgency, tenesmus. That's how the clinical history goes. And if you physically examine these patients, if the patient is having an active disease, you will find the patient toxic. A patient may have tenderness on the colon, and there may be actually distension abdomen with presence of rigidity and features of peritonitis if the patient is having toxic megacolon, and you can have other extraintestinal manifestations which can be seen in the same patient. As far as the laboratory tests are concerned, a stool examination shows presence of RBCs and WBCs. This is more important in those patients who are actually not responding to the treatment for ulcerative colitis, to see for secondary infection in the form of amoebic infection and other infections. Blood examination, the ESR goes up, the hemoglobin goes down, there's low albumin, the leukocytosis there, neutrophilic count goes up. These are the actually pointers which tells you that the patient is having a severe disease. Imaging is not very commonly used, but unusually it can be used whenever you are actually suspecting perforation in these patients. You can take assistance of CT scan and MRI. These are very important in patients of Crohn's disease, because as it is a transmural disease, you have to see across the mucosa you have to take MRI and CT into account. A plain X-ray of the abdomen is very important, especially those patients who are very sick, to rule out toxic megacolon. Nowadays, we are not doing barium contrast studies because we have availability of good endoscopes with us. So we actually initially see the activity of the disease by doing a sigmoidoscopy, and once the patient comes in remission, then we actually do a full-length colonoscopy to define the extent of the disease. This is the endoscopy picture on sigmoidoscopy. The initial findings are that there's loss of luster, loss of vascular pattern, and there's friability. That means you touch the endoscope, you find blood there, and in a severe case, you'll find presence of ulcers, big ulcers are there, and in a chronic disease you'll find pseudopolyps also. Basically, as far as the molecular pathophysiology is concerned, the mucosal immune system in a healthy state is a very balanced state of pro-inflammatory mediators and anti-inflammatory mediators, but in a patient who is having IBD, that is, whether it may be ulcerative colitis or Crohn's, the chronic mucosal inflammation in IBD produces more of pro-inflammatory cytokines like TNF-alpha, interleukin 1, 6, 2, and 12, resulting in colonic tissue damage. So it is more of the pro-inflammatory state which becomes heavier, and the anti-inflammatory mediators become lighter. So once the inflammation is there, you find more of the pro-inflammatory state. As far as pathophysiology is concerned, that occurs in two phases. The initial phase is the vascular phase. That means actually there is collection from the vascular space to the submucosa and mucosa of the lymphocytes, which get activated after their entry to the site. And then is the stage of intestinal wall phase, where the activated lymphocytes, they cause inflammation. So initially there is collection of the lymphocytes, followed by the cascade of inflammation, which leads to the development of IBD. As far as the vascular phase is concerned, the lymphocytes, as we all know, that it plays an important central role in the pathogenesis of IBD. Overall, the lymphocyte population gets expanded in patients of IBD, whether it is Crohn's or ulcerative colitis, in the submucosa. And the journey of the lymphocytes from the vascular space to the gut tissue is regulated by a series of adhesion molecules like adesin, integrin, ICAM, MIDCAM. These are the various actually adhesive molecules which actually help the lymphocytes to get adhered to the wall of the vessel, and then they migrate across the wall into the submucosal space. So these are the potential sites where the future medicines are going to come. In the intestinal phase, NFKB it has a key role. Basically, you find actually antigens and free radicals in the lumen. Normally, you have tight intracellular junctions between the two epithelial cells, but in a patient of colitis, you'll find these actually junctions, they get loosened up, and these antigens are taken up by the activated dendritic cells, and then they are presented to the activated macrophages, where actually the NFKB that becomes activated, that goes to the nucleus, and then it stimulates to form, to release increased amount of TNF-alpha, IL-1, IL-2, IL-6 and IL-12, and that leads to actually cascade of inflammation. Thus, inhibition of NFKB is of particular importance, and it is considered to be a putative target for intervention in treatment of IBD. As far as the role of NFKB is concerned in patient of IBD, normally actually the NFKB is in a inactive state, but in the presence of IKKB kinase, the inhibitory action over it gets dissociated after phosphorylation, and then active NFKB enters into the nucleus, and it stimulates the genes there to release the pro-inflammatory cytokines like TNF alpha, IL-1, IL-6, IL-12, and IL-2. So this is how actually that's going to work, and ultimately these inflammatory mediators, they come into the submucosal space and they cause mucosal inflammation in patients of ulcerative colitis and transmural inflammation in patients of Crohn's disease. So what are the current options available? We have probiotics, antibiotic, they are being tried in patients of ulcerative colitis, though it is presently a research tool. And we have aminosalicylates, 5-ASAs, mesalamine, all-salazine, belsalazide. These act on mucosa as an anti-inflammatory action. Then we have corticosteroids, which is the gold standard treatment in a patient who comes with exacerbation. Then we have biologics. These are infliximab, adalimumab, centralizumab. These are actually biologics which are being used in patients who are not responding to the usual treatment with aminosalicylates and corticosteroids. Then we have immune modifiers like azathioprine, cyclosporin, and methotrexate. So there are limitations of 5-ASA. These patients who are on long-term 5-ASA, they have hematological problems, they get hypersensitivity reactions occasionally, they have liver and renal abnormalities, heartburn, diarrhea, and headache. And if these patients are being given steroids, then you have impaired glucose tolerance test. Even these patients become diabetic, they get prolonged adrenal suppression, they are susceptible to various infections, they gain weight, and they get spontaneous infections also. Methotrexate is well known to cause dyspepsia, alopecia, myelosuppression, abdominal upsets, headache, and arthralgia. And anti-TNF agents are well known to cause reactivation of latent infections like tuberculosis. They get a lot of cutaneous reactions. They get systemic and hematological complications and allergic and local side effects where the injections are being given. Among the biologic therapy which is available, the most common one which is commercially available in India is infliximab. Then the other one which is available in India is adalimumab. The mechanism is they antagonize the activity of TNF alpha, which gets raised in patients of colitis and Crohn's disease. They initiate cytotoxicity on the immune cells, and they induce T cell apoptosis. So it has got multiple prong action in patients of IBD. As far as infliximab is concerned, it is a monoclonal antibody of Ig1 class. It is chimera of 75% of the human and 25% murine component. It is given in the dose of 5 milligram per kilogram, the initial dose at 0 week, followed by the second at 2 weeks, then at 6 weeks. And then it has to be maintained by giving 5 milligram per kilogram every 8 weeks, and it may be continued for 1 year or so. Adalimumab, it is Ig1 monoclonal antibody. It is totally humanized, so less of cutaneous reactions and allergic reactions as compared to infliximab. It is given in subcutaneously. The initial dose is 160 milligram at week 0. Then you reduce half the dose at 2 weeks, and then 40 milligram every other week. You can continue it for months together. The advantage with biologics is that it leads to mucosal healing, and that reduces the relapse rate in patients of IBD. This is not available in the Indian market. The adverse reactions of biologics are well known. Patients on these drugs get upper respiratory tract infections, other infections, dissemination of tuberculosis. There are increased chances of fungal infections and other intracellular pathogens. It leads to acute and delayed hypersensitivity reactions, development of anti-nuclear antibodies, double-stranded DNA antibodies, lupus-like reactions, demyelinating diseases. On long term, they can lead to lymphoma, and it is contraindicated in patients of CHF because of increased mortality. If you find actually lower levels of anti-TNF alpha, there is no anti-drug antibodies in the serum, then you increase the dose. If you find lower levels of anti-drug antibodies, then you increase the dose, and even actually you give these drugs at a shorter interval, and you add on with other immunomodulators. And if there is a high anti-drug antibodies against that biologic, then you have to actually switch over to the other anti-TNF alpha agent. And if you find that the serum levels of anti-TNF alpha is there, but patient is not responding, then you have to switch over to another group of drugs. What are the emerging options we have? Curcumin, that is actually a chemical name of haldi, that is being used from ancient times by Ayurvedas. It is actually being produced more in Southeast Asian countries like China, Japan and India. It has a diverse properties like anti-inflammatory action, antioxidant action, anti-proliferative action and anti-angiogenic action. It has got multiple mechanism of actions. Actually, it prevents activation of NF-κB by actually blocking the release of active form of NF-κB, and it decreases the entry of NF-κB into the nucleus, and thereby actually it decreases the release of various pro-inflammatory cytokines like TNF-alpha, IL-1, IL-2, IL-6 and IL-12. So that's how it decreases the inflammation in patients of IBD. It has been studied in mild to moderate ulcerative colitis. There was a study in which actually 89 patients were included, and in in both the groups, the mesalamine was continued in the dose of 2 to 3 grams, and with that 1 gram of actually curcumin was added in one group and placebo in the other group. And it was found that at 4 weeks the clinical remission was to the tune of 53.8% in patients who were receiving mesalamine and curcumin, and there was a partial response to the tune of 65% in patients who were on mesalamine only, mesalamine and curcumin, as compared to 12.5% in patients who were receiving only mesalamine. And there was a clear-cut endoscopic remission which was seen at 4 weeks in patients who were receiving curcumin and mesalamine. So curcumin was found to be safe and promising agent in the treatment of ulcerative colitis, mild to moderate. And it has been also found on the same study in these patients were followed every 2 months. For 6 months they were on treatment, and they were actually followed further for 1 year, and it was found that the relapse rate was more in patients who were receiving mesalamine and placebo as compared to mesalamine and curcumin. So curcumin proves to be an effective add-on medicine along with anti-inflammatory medicines to maintain remission and to prevent relapse with mesalamine or sulfazine. Conventional curcumin, actually it is hydrophobic, so it is poorly absorbed. It is undetectable in plasma. That is the reason that more amount of actually drug is available in the GI tract for its action. But if you make it hydrophilic, then it will actually get absorbed, and that can be used in other conditions apart from IBD. So the natural form actually doesn't reaches various organs and tissues in active form, or they have to be given in very high doses with a poor GI tolerability. So there is a need for an effective and tolerable curcumin formulation with a good bioavailability. So this is a unique technology of self-micro-emulsifying drug delivery system, in which actually this hydrophobic form is made of nano-sized hydrophilic droplets, which improves the absorption and better tissue penetration, and this will lead to decrease in dose requirement of curcumin. At the same time, it will have systemic effects on other systems also. This is my last slide, in which actually there are further molecules which are being actually tried Various anti-adhesive molecules are there, working on ICAM receptors, anti-IL-6 receptors, anti-IL-2 antibodies. So whatever actually are the pro-inflammatory cytokines, there are actually drugs which are being actually tried to act against them. But the unique property of curcumin is, like, it is actually preventing the release of multiple cytokines, like it reduces the release of TNF-alpha, IL-2, IL-6, IL-12. So it has got a multi-pronged action by actually preventing their release rather than acting on the target particular cytokines. Though the future is there for preventing the adhesions of the lymphocytes to the vessel wall and getting actually translocated into the submucosal space. So anti-adhesive molecules are there as research molecules which may be the future apart from curcumin in patients of inflammatory bowel disease. Thanks for your kind attention. Thank you.